good evening to you. I'm Yvonne Okwara Matole. Our big story tonight is all about that diplomatic tiff between Nairobi and Juba that is looming. The government has today issued a travel advisory warning Kenyans to avoid traveling to parts of the greater Upper Nile in South Sudan over insecurity. The advisory was issued earlier today by the Foreign Affairs Ministry through a statement that was sent to newsrooms. In that statement, Foreign Affairs Cabinet Secretary Monica Juma said Kenyans should avoid unnecessary travel to Bie, Latjor, Akobo, Jonglei, Northern Liech, and parts of Maiwut, as well as the Eastern Nile, Boma, and Ye River State, since their security cannot be guaranteed. The advisory comes barely a day after two pilots who were detained in South Sudan were released after nearly 2 months when their plane crashed in Akobo, a rebel-held territory near the border of South Sudan and Ethiopia. Now, this travel advisory is likely to stifle relations between Nairobi and Juba, and many Kenyans working in Africa's youngest nation are tonight a worried lot. Several Kenyans, will remind you, have been killed in both government and rebel-held territories of South Sudan since the civil war broke out in the year 2013. Now, when she received the two Kenyan pilots at Wilson Airport yesterday, Cabinet Secretary Monica Juma gave this warning.
Let me once again take this opportunity to advise Kenyans that are traveling abroad to exercise extreme caution, especially if you're going to countries that are unstable and that are experiencing an arrest. Let me also underscore that the lives, the property, the safety of every Kenyan abroad is a top government priority. We will continue to do everything possible to ensure that every Kenyan anywhere is safe.
On the show tonight, I will be speaking to the South Sudan ambassador to Kenya, and that's His Excellency Chol Mawut Ajongo. We'll also have international security expert Mumo Nzao, as well as veteran journalist John Gashie, who has covered the South Sudan region for quite a while now and is well versed with the ongoings in that country. And we'll also be getting perspective from a Kenyan who's living in South Sudan. Will he heed this warning? What has the situation been like for him doing business in South Sudan? Let's first start off with our lead reporter on the show tonight, Sophia Wanuna, who's joining us from the Nairobi Central Business District. Sophia?
Yvonne, good evening. A day after those two pilots that were abducted and detained in South Sudan by the Sudan People's Liberation Movement in opposition, today we saw that advisory that you talked about earlier that is urging people living in South Sudan, Kenyans living in South Sudan, to move from the areas that have been listed in that travel advisory, and also those seeking to travel to be careful as they do so because of the rebel-held areas. Security cannot be guaranteed in those regions, is what the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is saying today. And of course, this, as you mentioned, will strain relations for Kenya. South Sudan is an important partner. Remember, even just citing their flag, the similarities, very striking resemblance it has to that of Kenya. Kenya has played an integral role to the journey that South Sudan has walked thus far. The youngest nation in the world, this year celebrating her 7th year of independence, but it has not turned out as the international community, as the world hoped it would for South Sudan when she left and broke away from the larger Sudan, and which has got an analyst, even with a conversation and debate in Kenya going on about cessation, that in and of itself is not a panacea for peace and stability, if you like. So what does this mean for Kenyans? Remember, Yvonne, following that compromise peace agreement, quite a significant number of Kenyans moved into South Sudan to do business there. So this kind of an advisory does impact on those who have businesses there. And Kenyans have invested in various sectors in that country. So that will be affected. There are those employed there perhaps will have to come back home. But also at some point, and this was in 2014, South Sudan was a significant trading partner for Kenya, her fourth biggest trading partner, in fact, at the time, with 10.4% of Kenya's trade being with South Sudan. However, those fortunes have dwindled because of this kind of instability being witnessed. And the question that even arises from this recent case with those two pilots that were abducted and then returning home yesterday, the Kenyan government involved in the negotiations and to see their safe return, questions have been raised. Who was the Kenyan government negotiating with, Yvonne? Because they had been abducted and taken by the SPLMIO, that's the opposition, the rebels. So some people have described them as terrorists because of some of the events that have been witnessed in that part of the country. There have been gross violations of human rights. However, some of this also conducted by forces, agents as well in the government. So one of the things that's not clear at this point is the negotiations and talks. Why are they taking place with rebels? Does the Kenyan government negotiate with rebels? That is the question. But of course, for the families, they are happy to have them back home. But even also significant looking into the status of South Sudan. Remember, the UNHCR had said this year, 2018, the refugees from South Sudan would hit the 3 million mark. They had been at 2.5 million, but so many of South Sudanese leaving, exiting their country, moving to neighboring countries, including Kenya, where a significant number is hosted. And then you also have the internally displaced persons. So other than adversely affecting the economy in South Sudan, you have starvation has been an issue as well in that country. You have that governance in terms of structures, lack of stability. There have been numerous peace accords that have been reached, and continental bodies such as IGAD, now South Sudan being admitted in 2014 into the East African Community. The EAC has also been involved in those talks to bring lasting peace in this country, but also the larger United Nations and international community. You have a UN mission there as well being involved, but still that stability elusive up to this point. And so for Kenya, important that even as this advisory that is going to strain relations, to still figure out a way together with other partners to resolve the crisis and the mess and the mistrust largely that exists between the political factions in that country, to ensure that there is lasting peace, there is stability. Although some analysts looking at the situation in South Sudan will tell you that there are those who fuel and would like the situation and the crisis there to prevail because they are beneficiaries of war, and for them this is high time for business, is good business for them, unfortunately. So it will be interesting to see with this advisory going forward, with an antagonistic sense of a relationship with this advisory in place, Yvonne, what are the measures will Kenya going forward, will she, if at all, be assisting to still ensure that peace talks and efforts to bring the warring factions together on the table for the sake of the entire community and people of South Sudan is reached, Yvonne?
Thank you. Sophia Wanuna, our lead reporter on the show, live from the CBD here in Nairobi. Now we will get into the events and just a timeline of what's happened in South Sudan since 2013. But first, would be important for us to get some perspective tonight. I hope we can have now established sound contact tonight with the South Sudanese ambassador to Kenya. That's Ambassador Mawut Ajongo. Good evening, Your Excellency, and thank you for joining us on The Big Story today. Can you hear me?
Yes, good evening. Good evening.
Good, great.
I can hear you well.
Fantastic. Can we start off, Mr. Ambassador, with your reaction to the travel advisory that has been issued to your country today by Kenya's Ministry of Foreign Affairs?
Well, I mean, I've just seen most of the areas covered by the Kenyan advisory to the Kenyan people, or citizens or nationals in this case. I don't want to question the judgment, but I think it's a blanket coverage of areas that I totally believe that they are peaceful. And this goes back to simply one thing. Peace or security is more or less a relative issue. It's the relativity of the security is one thing that we can take in mind. If you happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, you may run into problems. And this can happen in Kenya, it can happen in the US or in London, for that matter. But when you look at the areas, the whole of Greater Upper Nile, I strongly believe that as a government, all Greater Upper Nile is not that risky. These incidents of the two pilots, they landed in a very small area, which is far east of South Sudan, which is actually being controlled by the rebels. And the government could not go there simply because there is ceasefire. If not because of that, the government could have been able to release or have presence in that particular place. But I think the advisory is too wide. Areas such as Ye River. I personally just came back from South Sudan, and I drove, fly to Wow, and I drove to a place, to my village, and it was actually driving from whole the town up to where I come from. So this advisory, I don't think it represents the realities on the ground. And as I earlier said, security is a matter of relativity. It depends on where you are. At the wrong time, in the wrong place, you can actually get into trouble. But first of all, before going ahead, I have, as a government, we must be very happy that, the Kenyans, the pilots, came back peacefully. Nothing happened to them. And they landed in a place where the rebels were in control, and they ran into problems. This is actually my first reaction.
Okay, let's speak
I hope you're hearing me.
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear, Mr. Ambassador. Let's perhaps speak a little bit about the case of the two Kenyan pilots who came back home yesterday. To what extent was the South Sudanese government, I know you say they landed in rebel territory and you couldn't go in there due to the ceasefire, but can you talk to us about the sort of level of involvement of the South Sudanese government in, in the capital in terms of trying to just have them rescued and brought back home? Or was this something that happened outside of the government's influence?
But, first of all, when these things happened, I was actually summoned to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And this thing was brought to my attention. The following day, as usual, I had to talk to the capital. And what the capital advised was that since we are in ceasefire, what we could do, we have to look for a neutral body, that is citizen, or JEMEC, which is a body that is entrusted to observe ceasefire between South Sudan and the rebels. And I thought my government talked to citizens. Of course, Kenyan as well as the government, they might have owned their contacts. Of course, they wouldn't share with us whom they contacted. But I strongly believe that the Kenyan ambassador was interviewed, our good friend, in South Sudan at some point. He was interviewed in Juba, that's Ambassador Loshore, that he was in contact with the rebels from where they are. And they were adamant that they wanted to get money paid before the release. Yes, the government, of course, made contacts, and I'm sure the government talked to JEMEC and Citizen, which are the bodies in charge of observing ceasefire between the government and the rebels.
Okay, what do you say then when the Kenya government says that in some of these areas, you've said the advisory is too broad and wide-reaching, but our government says that the state, that is the state of South Sudan, cannot guarantee the security of any Kenyans working there. What is your reaction to that specific statement?
That specific statement, as I said, crime can happen anywhere. A South Sudanese can run into a problem in Kenya, he gets killed or gets trouble. That will not actually give the government of South Sudan a right to say the Kenyan government cannot guarantee the safety of South Sudanese. And I actually said these are isolated cases. There are thousands of Kenyans that I know of who are still in South Sudan, and they are peaceful.
So
Kenyan government may have its own judgment. The reason yeah.
All right, Mr. Ambassador, then what sort of measures have you put in terms of securing not just Kenyans, there's many other nationals who are working in South Sudan. You're calling them isolated incidents. Then could you speak to the security that has been put in for not just Kenyans, but foreign nationals working in South Sudan? What guarantees can you give here on the show this evening?
Well, I mean, this is basically it goes back to what the government, what guarantees which every government does. I mean, as a state, you are responsible for security of the citizens in the country, whether they are nationals or foreigners. And as I said, the fact that a case happened against Kenyans, or the Kenyans get killed or get caught or abducted, as you rightly said in your introduction, doesn't mean that the government is not responsible. It doesn't actually imply that the government is not providing security. As I said, security is a relative issue. It can happen anywhere. The government, of course, will have presence, but some cases do happen. And we can name it. We can actually number cases where most countries that we may think of very secure are facing some of the challenges when it comes to security issues. So the government of South Sudan is in full control of where they are. Yes, there are cases of rebellion, places that we said, but it doesn't show that, it doesn't tell, or it doesn't speak to the fact that the government is not responsible, the government is not providing security to the people, because that's a fundamental responsibility of any state, of any government, when it comes to sovereignty.
All right, so some assurances that you can give in terms of specifics, sir. I know you've said that this can happen anywhere, but perhaps a lot of the people who are watching us from not just Kenya, but in all the 11 countries in which we are live tonight, are hoping to hear from you some assurances. What measures have been put in place to ensure not just foreign nationals, but South Sudanese as well?
I think that we are not talking here about South Sudanese getting in trouble, because if we are talking about South Sudanese, what assurance, because South Sudanese, I could also say, what assurance are you giving as the government of Kenya? Which is not the topic. The topic is actually narrowed. We are talking about cases of Kenyans that they landed in a territory controlled by the rebels, and they were kept hostage, asking for money because it was said that they have killed some cows or something like that. But in South Sudan, there is no issue of South Sudanese complaining of security. This is not to question the government of South Sudan. What assurance are you giving to South Sudanese as nationals? I think this is outside our jurisdiction. It's outside our mandate. As a government, we know what we are doing in South Sudan. We are not here asking also, as I said, I'm not asking what assurance is the Kenyan government doing for Kenyans to be safe. Because in Kenya, you could get up in the morning, you had cases of people getting killed. This does not actually give me that right to ask what guarantees the Kenyan government is giving to Kenyan citizens so that they don't get into trouble. And we can name it. It's quite a number of cases where you get up in the morning, somebody was shot, or thugs have killed somebody, or gangs. So can I ask the government of Kenya, what assurance are you giving to Kenyans because people are getting killed by gangs?
All right, Mr. Ambassador.
This is the topic.
Mr. Ambassador.
The topic is that, yes.
Will you be reaching out to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs?
Go ahead.
Will you be reaching out to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs over this advisory? Will you be attempting to see how this advisory can be reviewed, perhaps?
This is purely a bilateral issue. I don't think I'll discuss it over the media. I've seen the advisory just came in this afternoon, and I will definitely talk to Juba. This is have to be, of course, communicated to my capital. Depending on what the capital would say, this is what I'll pick it from there. If there is any other reaction that you will hear, probably we'll get it from Foreign Affairs. But I don't think I will give you my reaction with regard to this as we speak, because that's not the way we work as diplomats. We just got it. It was not sent to us officially. We got it online. There was no official correspondence sent to us as an embassy. Although I had a meeting with the Foreign Affairs at some point asking for areas, and I told them I have to talk to Juba so that Juba can advise, give out a directive, which areas that we think as a government could tell people that these are not safe. And also I told them in case if a Kenyan is going to South Sudan, you bet they take visas from us, you have an embassy in Juba, they can actually be able to talk to the embassy in Juba to be told where to go and where not to go. So with this advisory, I will have to, of course, we have to go to Juba. And it will depend on what Juba says, that then we'll pick it up from there. And I'm not going to be discussing my reaction towards the government of Kenya, or Minister of Foreign Affairs with this regard on the TV. Because we just got it. It was an informal letter sent to us, yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. That is South Sudanese ambassador to Kenya. That's Ambassador Chol Mawut Ajongo speaking to us, his reaction to that travel advisory that has been issued by the Kenya government, advising Kenyans to avoid unnecessary travel to areas that the Kenya government says the state cannot guarantee their security. We thank the ambassador for his time, and we'll continue to see how this plays out in just a moment. Now, even as we delve into our discussion in just a moment, you will see some data on your screen about the trouble in South Sudan that started in 2013 when President Salva Kiir fired his then Vice President Riek Machar. We'll be running that as we carry on with our discussion. So let's talk a little bit more about that first. Let's have you have a look at my guest tonight. We have Dr. Mumo Nzau, who is an international security expert, John Gashie, who is a veteran journalist who's been covering the issues in the region, particularly in South Sudan. Gentlemen, good evening and thank you. Dr. Nzau, I'd like to begin with you. So tonight we've got a travel advisory. The ambassador says they will be reviewing it and seeing how to respond to the Kenya government. But this comes on the back of quite a number of incidents that have taken place between Kenya and South Sudan and that civil war since 2013. What are your reflections at this point?
Very well, thank you, Yvonne. First thing, it is not right to put the ambassador on spot on some of these issues, because there are rules that guide diplomatic conduct. And South Sudan is a friendly state, is a friend of Kenya, and it was just because of an unfortunate incident. Of course, South Sudan is faced with challenges. They are internationally known, they are open, we know them. But all the same, I would like to, with a lot of respect, thank Ambassador, His Excellency Ambassador Chol, a representative of the Republic of South Sudan to Kenya. And he has, spoken like a diplomat and said it right, because the convention does not allow diplomatic officials to talk at each other in the media. That is another space. But all that said, there are pockets of ungoverned spaces in parts of South Sudan. That is a fact. And when governments react or ponder upon some of these issues, they do it with a lot of information. They consult at various levels before they come to such agreement. So the government of Kenya is not wrong. It is addressing its own citizens, and I know that would sound a little bit on the harsh side for our brothers in South Sudan, but all the same, it is the responsibility of every government to guarantee the safety, security, and life, liberty, property of its citizens, and therefore the government of Kenya also owes its own citizens that responsibility. So it's trying to do that. And I trust from the very kind words and very diplomatic approach by Ambassador, His Excellency Ambassador Chol, I trust with time they will be able to consult more to see which of those areas can be scaled down to places where at least it's safe to go. But it's the right thing first for government to warn its citizens, because there have been some transgressions or people who went to places where they were advised otherwise not to be, and so on. And another thing, Yvonne, is to say that when I saw the pictures of the pilots, when the footage and when the pilots came there, you could read a lot of relief, and they looked quite shaken and so on. And it means that basically South Sudan is facing problems of state formation. There are ungoverned spaces, and they are in hands of people who are probably not following the proper conduct of even the rules of engagement in terms of armed intercourse or armed engagements. And therefore, both governments have got to take caution. And I'm very thankful that the ambassador is not sounding really offensive or on the defensive. Is only that you put to him certain questions that have to react in that way. But I know that our two countries are in good terms, and that was the right thing to do.
We will come back to you in a minute. Let's bring in John Gashie for just a moment, because John, Dr. Nzawa's talked about the issues of state formation, and that is what the country of South Sudan is grappling with. You've covered this region for a very long time. What's your impression of where South Sudan is today at this very moment? How would you describe it?
Thank you, Yvonne. My initial take is that the impact and the unraveling of the South Sudan is coming home to the people of East Africa and indeed the larger international community. And perhaps is an indictment that there is need for more urgent, leveraged and active engagement to stem the further unraveling of South Sudan. Listening to the ambassador and also listening to my fellow panelists, I get the feeling that we are trying to be too, perhaps, playing around with words. And I can accept the ambassador, perhaps he is bound by certain bilateral conventions and diplomatic etiquette. But what the Kenyan move is a belated acknowledgement that South Sudan is unraveling. Now, that notwithstanding, the issue of what is happening in South Sudan is a matter of great importance and interest to the region. And unless and until the region engages very proactively and urgently and swiftly, what we are just seeing is just the tip of the iceberg. Let's look at the numbers for a start. Nearly 5 million people, or perhaps even slightly less, are internally displaced in South Sudan. There are in excess of about 1 million refugees in Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, South Sudan. What we are seeing right now is that the conflict, the internal conflict in South Sudan is slowly getting home and getting very close to us. Now, I am also trying to look at it in this perspective. We are very concerned right now, and rightly so, that our pilots did come back. But there is a larger issue here. That advisory is an acknowledgement, at least for now, by the Kenya government, that the government of South Sudan, as it is now, larger section of its territory are indeed insecure, and that despite what perhaps the ambassador is talking about, the ceasefire agreement and all these other issues, is that they cannot even guarantee the safety of their own people. Now, where does Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, the international community come into the picture? Is that now what was then seen as an internal issue is having an immediate impact within our countries.
Okay, great.
Now,
John.
Kenya perhaps...
John, can you hear me? Hold it right there, because that is definitely a matter I want us to get into after the break, which is that this is now spilling over into the other countries. And indeed, Kenya has been a friend of South Sudan. I mean, the CPA was signed here. And this is something that Kenya holds dearly. We'll be talking about that now, what Kenya does. And I'll also like to hear from Dr. Mumonzao. This travel advisory, is it a sign of the unraveling of South Sudan? We'll be talking about that and much more. And indeed, what the IGAD member states need to do regarding the situation in South Sudan. Has South Sudan been forgotten by her neighbors and the world? This is the big story. We'll be right back with my guests as we discuss the situation in South Sudan.